He was just a dog, until the trial exposed everything. At first, people only saw the scars, the way he limped, the way he wouldn't eat unless he saw the man beside him take the first bite. They said, "He's just a rescue." But what was he rescued from? No one knew the truth behind Valor's breeding. The illegal experiments, the falsified records, the chain of dogs trained to obey pain more than voice. No one. Until Lena Hart walked back into Jonas's life carrying a sealed envelope that would unravel a multi-million-dollar empire built on suffering. This isn't just a story about a courtroom or a kennel. It's about a legacy written in blood and loyalty, about a brother's ghost that never left, about a dog who never gave up on his own name. By the time the world learned who Valor really was, it was too late for silence. The dogs were watching, and the public had made its verdict. The heat shimmered over the jagged ridges of Coast Province, a haze of sun and silence that never quite let up. The only sound in the ravine was the crunch of boots over gravel and the steady breath of a dog trained to survive war. Aiden Wexler moved like a shadow-focused, lean, his eyes scanning ahead through the dust. At his side padded Echo, a German shepherd bred from generations of discipline and instinct. Wexler blood, Wexler bond. They had worked like this for over a year, clearing paths for convoys, locating IEDs, tracking insurgent movement through desolate terrain. And today, their orders were simple: recon on an abandoned outpost just off Route Garrison. It had been quiet for weeks. Too quiet. "Echo," Aiden whispered, and the dog halted. Echo's ears flicked forward. His body froze, tail horizontal, nose flaring. Aiden's fingers tightened around the grip of his rifle. They both felt it at the same time. The silence wasn't peace. It was waiting. Then the first shot cracked. Chaos erupted, bullets whipping through the canyon like hornets. Echo lunged sideways, shoving Aiden toward cover behind a boulder. Dirt sprayed up like smoke. Aiden rolled, aimed, returned fire, called out, "Tango 3, we're engaged. Need backup, Echo's hit, Echo's hit." The dog didn't cry out. He never did. But his flank was red. Aiden crawled to him, dragging his partner into the shadow of the rock. Echo licked his wrist once, just once, before trying to rise again. Duty over pain. That was Echo. "Stay down," Aiden begged, voice trembling. "Just stay with me, buddy." More gunfire. Aiden's radio buzzed static, then silence. And then, somewhere above them, a detonation. The last thing Aiden saw was the flash that swallowed the sky. Half a world away, Jonas Wexler was watering the roses outside the farmhouse when the black SUV rolled up the gravel path. He knew. Before the door even opened. Before the uniformed man stepped out, hat in hand. Before a word was said, he knew. "No," Jonas whispered, voice raw. "No, no, no." But the man approached. "Mr. Wexler, I'm afraid I have terrible news. Your son, Sergeant Aiden Wexler, was killed in action outside Coast Province. His canine partner, Echo, was also lost in the ambush. They died together." The world narrowed to one sound, the thud of the watering can hitting the earth. Jonas didn't remember falling to his knees, didn't remember clutching the man's uniform, or the scream that tore out of him like something ancient. All he remembered was the silence after, the kind that hums in your chest like a cracked bell. Inside the house, the photos on the wall didn't change. Aiden grinning in uniform, Echo beside him, tongue out, medals gleaming, frozen moments, lies now. Jonas sat on the floor of Aiden's childhood room that night, holding the last collar Echo ever wore. It still smelled of dust and sun. He buried his face into it and wept, not like a man, but like a father who had built his world around two souls and lost them both in the same breath. Outside, the roses wilted in the July heat. The funeral was military precise, folding of the flag. Echo's name read aloud as if he were human, which to Jonas he was. No words from Jonas. He stood in his pressed gray suit like a ghost stitched into the crowd, unmoving, unblinking. Afterward, a stranger approached him. Slick suit, sharp jaw, cold eyes. "Mr. Wexler," the man said. "My name is Darian Cole. I represent several private canine institutions. I was deeply saddened to hear about Aiden and Echo. The Wexler bloodline is a legend in the community. I'd like to talk to you about continuing that legacy." Jonas stared through him. Darian continued, "I know it's hard, but perhaps it's time to think ahead. We could preserve everything you and your family built. I'd be honored to carry that forward. I even drew up a preliminary contract just in case you're ready." Jonas didn't read it. But a week later, when the silence of the house became unbearable and every corner held Aiden's echo, he walked into his office and found the contract again. On the desk, crisp, unopened. He signed it with hands that didn't feel like his own. The Wexler kennel changed overnight. New banners, new name. Cole Elite Shepherds. Jonas watched from his living room window as the old signs were hauled away in trucks. The breeding rights, the client lists, the champion bloodline, all transferred, all legally sealed, all gone. He didn't fight it, didn't speak to anyone. The once proud trainer who had taught hundreds of police and military units vanished from public life like a ghost at sunrise. He packed what he needed, his son's photos, Echo's leash, a box of ribbons from dog shows past, and disappeared into the woods, into silence. Years passed. No one heard from Jonas Wexler again. Rumors whispered about a cabin in the mountains, about a man who once trained legends and now spoke only to trees, a man who had nothing left to train, nothing left to give. But in that cabin, late at night, Jonas would sometimes still set out 2 bowls, one for water, one for memory. And though no paws scratched at the door and no bark ever answered back, he waited anyway, because sometimes the dead don't leave. They just grow quiet, and sometimes love outlives the ones who carried it. It began with silence, not the kind that comforts, but the kind that hollows, the kind that creeps into walls, into marrow, until it swallows sound and sleep and even breath. Jonas Wexler sat at the edge of his son's empty bed, fingers tangled in the old quilt that hadn't been touched since Aiden's last visit home. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and gun oil, a scent that once meant pride. Now it only meant absence. He hadn't spoken in days. Not when the military chaplain delivered the folded flag. Not when the local sheriff came by, hat in hand, voice low. "I'm so sorry, Jonas. Aiden was one of the good ones." Not when the neighbors brought casseroles wrapped in foil and pity. He just nodded, or didn't. It didn't matter. At the funeral, beneath a sky too blue to be kind, Jonas stood beside the casket like a statue carved from grief. The priest read psalms. Echo's name was etched on a plaque below Aiden's. Sergeant Aiden Wexler and K9 Echo. Brothers in service, lost in war, never forgotten. But Jonas said nothing. No eulogy, no trembling thanks, no stories about bedtime training or how Echo learned to open the barn door before he could heal. He stared forward, fists clenched, eyes dry. Not because he wasn't broken, but because the tears had dried up 3 nights ago on the bathroom floor. They buried his son beside his wife, and Jonas buried whatever part of him still believed the world made sense. The days blurred. Sunrises were cruel reminders that time hadn't stopped with Aiden's last breath. The phone rang once. Jonas didn't answer. Bills piled on the counter. Mail went unopened. The roses outside withered. He stopped shaving, stopped eating. Only one thing remained sacred: the kennel. The Wexler kennel had stood for 3 generations. His grandfather had bred shepherds that served in Normandy. His father trained dogs for the FBI. And Jonas made legends. Dogs that sniffed out bombs in deserts, found missing children in blizzards, brought cops home safe. The bloodline they preserved wasn't just pedigree, it was purpose. But now the pens were empty. Echo was gone. And so was the will to start again. That's when Darian Cole returned. The man stepped out of a black car like he owned the air around it. Sleek suit, Rolex watch, a smile too white to trust. "Jonas," he said, walking up the gravel path with calculated sympathy, "I was hoping we could talk." Jonas didn't answer. He just leaned against the fence, arms crossed, as Darian continued. "I was there, you know, at the funeral. I didn't want to intrude, but seeing the turnout, the way people spoke about Aiden and Echo, it reminded me why your family name still carries so much weight." He paused, then offered a leather folder. "I've been working on a proposal, a way to preserve what you built. The Wexler line deserves to live on even if you're not in a place to continue it yourself. Let me take the pressure off. I'll maintain the breeding program. I'll finance the facilities. I'll even keep the Wexler name on the paperwork. Out of respect." Jonas took the folder. His fingers were rough from decades of work, but now they trembled like a man much older. He didn't open it, just stared at it. "You'd be doing right by Aiden," Darian added softly. "By Echo." That's when it hit him in the ribs like a sucker punch. Aiden would have wanted the bloodline to survive. The dogs, the training, the purpose, all of it. Wasn't that why he took Echo to war? Why he believed in what they stood for? Jonas turned away, hiding the shake in his jaw. "Leave it," he muttered. "I'll look." That night, Jonas sat at the kitchen table under the dim glow of a single bulb. The papers lay open in front of him. Legal terms, clauses, transfer of ownership, rights to stud services, licensing of the Wexler brand, a tidy signature line waiting at the bottom. He drank half a bottle of bourbon before he picked up the pen. "Just temporary," he told himself. "Just until I can breathe again." He signed. By the end of the month, everything was gone. Trucks rolled up to the property, hauling off crates, equipment, and records. Cole's people were fast and efficient, smiles on their faces, polite nods as they gutted the place. The Wexler name was taken off the gate, replaced with a polished sign that gleamed under the morning sun: Cole Elite Shepherds. Jonas stood in the barn as they emptied the last of the feed bins. He said nothing. No one noticed the photo he slipped into his jacket, the last picture of Aiden and Echo, taken just before deployment. Echo had one paw on Aiden's boot, tongue out, eyes alert. Aiden was laughing, a flash of youth Jonas barely remembered anymore. When the trucks pulled away, Jonas closed the barn doors and didn't reopen them. He left that night. No note, no forwarding address, just packed a duffel bag, his son's dog tags, and Echo's worn leather collar. He drove until the road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to silence. A cabin near the tree line, half-rotten porch, dusty windows. It didn't matter. It was far from everything and close to what he needed: nothing. In the early mornings he sat on the steps and watched mist curl through the pine trees. In the evenings he lit a fire and poured a bowl of water, just in case, just in memory, because grief doesn't fade. It grows roots. And Jonas Wexler, once the man behind the finest shepherds in America, let himself vanish into that soil. It didn't happen all at once. Jonas Wexler didn't vanish like a man chased. He disappeared like smoke after fire, slow, lingering, a quiet surrender to the wind. No headlines marked his exit. No neighbors called in worry. He simply slipped through the cracks of the world until even his name began to sound like myth. The kennel that once echoed with barking and the soft shuffle of paws turned to stone. Empty runs, dry troughs, wind pushing through the wooden slats like breath through a dying chest. For over 60 years the Wexler name had stood for honor, discipline, and bloodlines forged in purpose. Now the gates hung crooked, rust crawling like rot through every bolt. People still came at first. Military officers, old trainees, reporters looking for a quote about Aiden, about Echo, about the so-called lineage of heroes. But Jonas was gone. No one knew where he went. No family to check on him. No friends close enough to insist. The man who had shaped generations of service dogs simply ceased to answer the door, the phone, or the world. Darian Cole used the silence like gasoline. With Jonas out of the picture and the signed papers in hand, Darian moved quickly. The Wexler name was scrapped within a month. He poured money into a flashy rebrand, new logos, gilded brochures, sleek marketing videos with dramatic music and slow-motion shots of shepherds leaping over obstacles. Cole Elite Shepherds. That was the new headline. And America bought it. Police departments, private security firms, even foreign governments. Darian's team sold the dogs as luxury warriors, bred for loyalty, forged in excellence. They paraded Echo's lineage as their crown jewel, weaving stories of heroism that had once belonged to Jonas and his son. Every sale was a betrayal, every dollar a brick laid on Aiden's grave. Deep in the high country, far from flashing billboards and televised dog shows, Jonas Wexler lived like a ghost. The cabin he'd found had no address, just a dirt road that curved through the trees and ended in stillness. The wood creaked like bones in the cold. The roof leaked when the rain came hard. But it was quiet, and it was his. He didn't bring much. A duffel bag, a few changes of clothes, a worn flannel that still smelled faintly of hay and tobacco. But there were two things he never let go of. Aiden's dog tags and Echo's collar. The collar hung from a hook above the fireplace. Leather, frayed at the edges, buckle scratched by time and teeth. Jonas stared at it for hours some nights, firelight flickering in his eyes like distant lightning. Sometimes he swore he heard the jingle of it. Sometimes he swore he heard Echo's paws on the porch. But when he opened the door, it was always just wind and pine and the aching hum of what used to be. He stopped counting the seasons after the second winter. The calendar still hung on the wall, open to the month Aiden died. No dates marked, no birthdays circled, no holidays remembered. Each morning, Jonas woke to the same routine. Chop wood, boil water, feed the birds. In the evenings, he sat by the fire with a tin mug of black coffee and the old photo album pages yellowed, plastic peeling. One photo stayed loose in the back. Aiden and Echo in uniform, crouched beside a dusty Humvee, both grinning with eyes full of life. Jonas held that photo like a prayer thumb brushing the corner so often it began to wear thin. He didn't cry anymore. The grief had settled too deep for tears. It had calcified, turned into something quieter. He carried it the way old men carry war wounds, not with complaint, but with resignation. He talked to them sometimes, not loudly, not like a man gone mad, just enough to feel heard. Echo would have hated the snow this year, he'd mumble into the silence. Or, "You should have seen the hawks circling this morning, Aid. Looked like the sky had teeth." And then silence again. In town, the name Jonas Wexler faded like ink in the rain. New trainers opened flashy kennels. Darien gave TED Talks on behavioral precision and elite dog breeding. People applauded. The legacy was being rewritten in real time without its author. No one asked where the old man had gone. No one remembered the stories Jonas used to tell, the one about the German shepherd that dragged a wounded boy 3 miles through enemy lines, or the pup that refused food for 4 days until its handler returned from surgery. Those stories had become relics, and Jonas had become one too. One night the snow came heavy, wind howled through the trees like something feral, and the cabin groaned under the weight of the storm. Jonas sat at the window, Echo's collar in his lap, eyes lost in the white blur outside. He whispered, "They've taken everything, old friend." The wind didn't answer. But somewhere deep in the forest a lone howl broke through the storm, distant, aching, strangely familiar. Jonas straightened. The collar jingled faintly in his hand. For the first time in months, his chest ached with something other than grief. A memory? A warning? He didn't know, but the feeling lingered, and so he waited. Not for redemption, not even for revenge, just for something to change the silence. Because legacies don't die quietly. They burn even when no one's watching. And in the heart of a broken man, surrounded by ghosts and pine, a spark had begun to smolder. It would take time, but time was all Jonas had left. The morning began like any other. Jonas Wexler stirred at the sound of pine needles brushing the window pane, the hush of snowfall thickening the silence. The stove crackled low in the corner, chasing back the mountain cold that crept in through the warped floorboards. He moved slowly, bones stiff with age and memory, pouring dark coffee into a tin mug, his breath fogging in the air as he stood by the frostbitten window. Outside, the forest was still, untouched, no tire tracks, no footprints. Just a canvas of white that made it feel like the rest of the world had vanished overnight. And maybe, in a way, it had. He was halfway through his first sip when he heard it, a soft thump against the cabin door. Jonas froze. Not birds, not wind. This was heavier, deliberate. He set the mug down with a quiet clink and moved to the door, heart ticking just a little faster. He opened it slowly. Nothing but snow, and a single black envelope resting on the doorstep, the corners crisp despite the cold, its surface beaded with melting frost. No footprints. No vehicle sounds fading in the distance. Jonas stepped out, picked it up with a gloved hand. The paper was thick, weighted, the kind used for wedding invitations or death notices. He closed the door behind him and brought the envelope to the table, sitting down without a word. For a moment he just stared at it. No stamp, no return address, no name, just a wax seal pressed into the flap, an unfamiliar emblem, a stylized shepherd's head surrounded by a ring of laurel leaves embossed in silver. He hesitated, then cracked it open with the edge of his pocket knife. Inside, 2 things fell out. The first was a letter, folded, heavy stock paper, edges gilded in gold, the kind of stationery that screamed money, power, and something colder beneath both. He unfolded it. "Mr. Wexler, You are formally invited to the Cole Elite Winter Auction, an exclusive event showcasing our finest new generation of working-line German Shepherds. Attendance is strictly limited to verified parties of interest. Your presence has been requested. Location: the Havergate Estate. Date: January 14th. Time: 8 p.m. Black tie optional. Legacy non-negotiable. CES. Jonas read it again and again. His fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold. The second item was a photo. He picked it up slowly. A young German shepherd stared back at him, ears erect, posture proud, frame not yet filled out but already shaped with purpose. A pup on the edge of adulthood. But it wasn't the stance that stopped Jonas's breath. It was the eyes. Amber, intelligent, deep-set and steady. Eyes that didn't blink for the camera. Echo's eyes. No, not possible. But he knew those eyes. He'd seen them shine through smoke and sand and cobble, locked on Aiden like a second shadow. He'd seen them blink closed for the last time, at least. That's what the military told him. He had held Echo's collar in his hands. They were KIA. Killed in action. He whispered aloud, "You're not supposed to exist." Jonas turned the photo over. No date, no name. Just a hand-scrawled word, almost taunting in its simplicity. Lot 7. He sat there for a long time. The fire crackled low. The room grew dim with clouded afternoon light, but he didn't move. The invitation lay before him like an open door he never asked to see again. Darian Cole. This reeked of him. The branding, the theater, the arrogance of hosting an auction of lives wrapped in silver paper and fine wine. Jonas clenched his jaw. So this was what it had come to, selling off bloodlines like antiques. And yet, why send it to him? He was a ghost, forgotten, a name buried with the kennel sign. Unless they wanted to twist the knife, unless they knew he'd recognize the eyes. Echo's line wasn't just genetics, it was legacy. Loyalty encoded in sinew and soul. And if that pup was who Jonas feared it was, then Darian was parading around his son's memory with a price tag. A slow fury burned in his chest. Not loud, not theatrical, just the kind that grips your ribs like a vice and doesn't let go. Jonas stood, photo still in hand. He crossed the room to the fireplace where Echo's collar still hung. He took it down. For the first time in years, he clipped it to his belt. No words, no ceremony. Just a quiet vow passed between silence and embers. The wind howled against the window as the day died, scattering white across the world like ash. Jonas turned toward the storage chest in the corner. He hadn't opened it since the day he left. Inside was a suit wrapped in plastic. A pair of polished black boots, a badge from a lifetime ago, and a worn leather notebook, labeled in faded ink. Wexler line, pedigree notes. He didn't need much, just answers. And maybe one last fight. The fire burned low. Shadows danced along the timber walls like old ghosts replaying scenes Jonas Wexler had spent years trying to forget. The photo lay on the table beside the invitation, weighted as if it carried more than just ink and pixels. Echo's eyes stared back at him from that young dog's face. Calm, resolute, eternal. The kind of stare that made a man question what he believed was already buried. Jonas hadn't slept, not since the envelope came, not since the past knocked on his door with laurel wax and gold leaf. He stood at the window now, watching the morning snow settle over the clearing like time trying to smooth over scars. The trees stood silent, indifferent, but Jonas could feel the pressure rising, like something was coming that the forest itself had no name for. Something had shifted. He ran his hand down the back of his neck, calloused, weathered, as if feeling for something lost beneath the skin. He turned back toward the table and stared at the photo one more time. Then, without a word, he walked toward the wood stove, dropped to one knee, and began removing the fire tools beside it, shoving aside kindling, moving the slate board. The ground below was oak planks, but one the third from the left was looser than the rest. Jonas slid a knife beneath the edge and lifted it. Beneath was dirt, cold, packed tight. He reached in, scooping by hand until his knuckles met metal. With a grunt, he pulled up a dented green military ammo box, its hinges rusted but still intact. He hadn't touched it in almost 15 years, not since Aiden's last championship win, not since the night they sat on the porch drinking beer after Echo's final trial, dreaming about the kennel's expansion, about international certification, about building something the world couldn't ignore. Back when the name Wexler meant something other than grief. Jonas brushed the dirt from the lid and set the box on the floor. He paused, breathed in, then opened it. Stacks of bills, tightly bound, lined the interior row after row of aged currency, yellowing around the edges, but crisp and real. $200,000 in cash, his life's work, money earned from decades of breeding excellence, training world champions, conducting seminars across Europe and Asia, and winning the most prestigious working dog competitions in the world. Jonas had buried it after Aiden died, not out of paranoia, out of spite, because no amount of wealth could buy back what he lost, and because, in truth, there was no longer anything worth spending it on, until now. He took a deep breath. His eyes stung not from dust but from something deeper, something old, something he thought had died alongside Echo and the folded flag they gave him in place of his son. He stared at the money for a long time and wrestled. The mind is cruel in the early hours. It paints with memory. It whispers what-ifs, like prayers no one answers. Jonas found himself sitting on the cabin floor, back against the wall, metal case still open, the cold pressing in through the seams of the world. He remembered the day he first placed a leash in Aiden's tiny hand. How the boy had looked up with wonder when Echo nudged his knee-nose to thigh, like a silent vow. He remembered the first time Aiden fell during a training drill, and Echo had doubled back, standing over the boy, refusing to move until he got up again. Jonas had raised them both, dog and boy, as partners, equals. And when they were deployed, it was as if he had sent half his own soul into war. The photo on the table twisted in the dim cabin light. That pup Lot 7 wasn't just a dog. He was the last living thread, a final ember in a fire the world tried to extinguish. And now, Darian Cole was putting a price tag on that ember. Jonas clenched his fists. Cole had taken everything: kennel, brand, reputation. He even tried to rewrite the narrative, selling Cole elite shepherds like the Wexler legacy was something he'd crafted himself. But this invitation, it was Cole's mistake, because he underestimated what still burned beneath the ash. Jonas stood. He took the case and brought it to the table, placing it beside the photo. He stared down at both, then reached for Echo's collar, still clipped to his belt. He ran his thumb over the engraved nameplate, scratched, dulled by time, but still legible. Echo, Wexler K9, 0142. He clipped it gently around his wrist like a bracelet, as if grounding himself to something real. He whispered into the empty room, voice gravel. "All right, boy. One more time." When Jonas rose that morning, the air had held only silence. Now it held intention. He packed lightly, a weathered black coat, boots from a forgotten past, a single duffel, and the ammo box. He locked the cabin with a rusted key and left the fire dying in the hearth. The road was long, but the bloodline was calling, and Jonas Wexler was finally ready to answer. The mirror above the bathroom sink was cracked in one corner. It had been years since Jonas looked at himself long enough to notice. Now, the reflection stared back like a stranger. Gray had crept into his beard like frost claiming a field, his eyes, once sharp, confident, the color of storm clouds over desert rock, had dulled, ringed by the long siege of grief. He didn't flinch when the blade made its first pass across his cheek. The scrape of steel against stubble was steady, deliberate. One stroke, then another. The beard fell away like dead bark, revealing the contours of a man who used to command stadiums full of handlers, trainers, generals. The man whose word once shaped bloodlines across continents. He rinsed his face in cold water, let it sting, let it wake something buried too long. Then he opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside, a folded blazer, dark charcoal wool, smelling faintly of cedar and thyme, a crimson tie still knotted from the last funeral, leather boots he hadn't worn since he walked out of the courthouse the day Darian Cole took possession of the Wexler name. Jonas took his time brushing the dust from the blazer's shoulders. Time, like grief, was patient. But today, so was vengeance. The cabin floor creaked as he walked toward the back room, a place he hadn't touched in over a decade. There, behind a stack of old dog crates and boxes of training manuals, hung the framed certificate he once ripped from the wall in disgust. United States Working K-9 Federation, Master Breeder and Trainer, Jonas Wexler. He set it on the table beside Echo's collar, then opened a narrow drawer in the corner desk. Inside, a worn black notebook, a list, a map of names, contacts, bloodlines, co-owners, dogs he'd trained, puppies sold under contract. He flipped the pages slowly, marking each face, each name, each echo of what the Wexler bloodline once meant, and what it might still become. His eyes paused on one name circled in red ink. Asher Vale, Prague, a ghost from the old world. A man who once said, "No one owns a legacy. They only steward it long enough to pass it forward." Jonas exhaled slowly. Maybe this wasn't just about revenge anymore. Maybe this was about reclaiming something sacred. He stood in front of the full-length mirror, blazer on, Echo's collar tucked in the inside pocket like a relic. His boots were polished with the edge of a rag and old spit. His belt bore the faint imprint of a show whistle he hadn't carried in 12 years. The transformation was subtle but absolute. Not a disguise, a resurrection. The man in the mirror wasn't broken anymore. He was sharpening. He walked outside. Snow crunched underfoot. The forest stood silent, reverent, as if even the trees knew something old was waking. Jonas approached the shed and opened the side door. Inside, a steel lockbox. Inside that, a Walther PPK, legal and registered, untouched since the break-in 15 years ago that convinced him no one respected peace unless it came with weight in your hand. He checked the magazine. Full. He didn't want war, but he wasn't naive enough to enter a battlefield unarmed. He slid the pistol into the holster inside his duffel, zipped it shut. This wasn't just a kennel dispute. This was a bloodline war, and Darian Cole had no idea what kind of man he'd pushed into the shadows. Before he left, Jonas walked to the tree near the kennel's old fence line, the same oak where Echo used to sit during obedience drills, tongue lolling, eyes locked on Aiden's every movement. The tree still bore the carved initials, A+E Wexler K9. Time had tried to erase it, but the mark was still there, just like Echo's bloodline, just like Aiden's shadow. Jonas pressed his palm against the bark, closed his eyes, and whispered, barely audible, "I'm not letting it end like this." He loaded the duffel into the old Ford parked beside the woodshed. The engine sputtered, then roared like it remembered who it belonged to. He adjusted the rearview mirror and saw himself, clean-shaven, jacketed, eyes burning. For the first time in years, Jonas Wexler wasn't running from the past. He was driving straight into it. The black car pulled into the porte cochere of the Langmore Regent Hotel just after sunset. The cold sheen of February twilight reflected off the marble columns and gold-tinted glass, throwing distorted shadows of valets and guests dressed like royalty. Jonas stepped out slowly, his boots touching down like a man remembering gravity. He adjusted the collar of his blazer still sharp, though worn at the seams, and slung the duffel bag over one shoulder. It wasn't the weight of the bag that made him pause before entering. It was the scent new money, designer perfume, ambition sprayed on thick like armor. The air itself seemed allergic to sincerity. A bellhop moved toward him, hesitated, then redirected himself toward a couple stepping out of a Bentley. Jonas didn't blame him. He didn't look like he belonged here. Not anymore. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was gilded silence. The woman beside him smelled of jasmine and something synthetic. She didn't look at him once. In the mirrored paneling, Jonas saw his own reflection-creased brow, storm-weathered eyes, posture too solid to be casual. Not polished, but not broken either. He adjusted Echo's collar in his jacket pocket. Its brass tag clinked softly, a sound only he noticed. The elevator chimed. "Ballroom, auction access only." He stepped out into velvet. The ballroom had been reborn into something decadent and dangerous. Velvet ropes marked off private lounges like confessionals for the rich. Crystal chandeliers bled soft gold over tables adorned with rare bloodline portfolios, each one encased in glass, guarded by men who looked ex-military but wore earpieces like jewelry. Laughter drifted through the air, punctuated by the pop of champagne corks. There were no name tags, only whispered introductions and eye contact thick with calculation. Jonas felt it instantly. He wasn't a guest. He was a ghost. "Jesus, is that Jonas Wexler?" The voice came from somewhere behind him, sharp, nasal, meant to cut. A man in an ivory tuxedo brushed past, his cologne trailing like arrogance. His companion, a younger man with swept-back hair and snakeskin loafers, smirked. "I thought he was dead," he muttered just loud enough. Jonas didn't react. Predators that made too much noise rarely hunted well. He moved toward the display podiums. There they were. Photo portfolios of German shepherds born from designer lineage. Cole Elite Shepherds, the plaques read. But the angles of their skulls, the fire in their posture, it wasn't Cole's. It was Wexler. He saw it in the stance of the dog on panel 7A, sable male with a white blaze across the chest. The eyes, that tilt of the ears. That unbreakable gaze. It was Echo's blood, rebranded, auctioned, like furniture. "Didn't expect to see a relic like you here." The voice was low, smooth, infused with mockery. Jonas turned. Darian Cole stood across the room, champagne in hand, bespoke suit immaculate. Time hadn't touched him the same way. The man still had the skin of privilege and the confidence of someone who believed he could purchase legacy. Jonas didn't blink. Darian walked toward him slowly, each step punctuated by practiced charm. "Jonas, you've aged into something almost respectable," he said with a tight-lipped smile. Jonas studied him in silence. Then, "Still selling my son's work like it was yours?" The room didn't quiet, just dimmed slightly in energy. The pause was enough. Darian chuckled. "Your son's bloodline died with him. This," he gestured grandly, "is evolution. You left it. I saved it." Jonas stepped closer, voice low. "You bought it." Darian sipped his champagne. "Same thing, in the right suit." There was a flicker behind Jonas's eyes. Not rage, something colder, more surgical. "You know," Darian went on, "some people are better remembered than seen. You showing up? That's nostalgia, not relevance." Jonas didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence had weight. He let it linger, then turned and walked toward the dog portfolios. A handler in a gray suit intercepted him. "I'm sorry, sir. These dogs are invitation-only entries. Clients must have pre-approved bidding status." Jonas glanced at him. "What's the lot number for the sable male with the blaze?" "Excuse me?" Jonas pointed. "That one." The handler hesitated. "Lot 41. Cole's Sovereign Valor, grandson of—" "Echo," Jonas finished, voice quiet. The handler looked puzzled. "No, sir. The records list the grandsire as—" "I know what the records say," Jonas interrupted. "They lie." He stood there for a moment longer, eyes fixed on Valor's photograph. That look, that unteachable intensity. It wasn't just Echo's blood. It was a second chance, a spark of something sacred still breathing under all this velvet. He turned to leave. Let them laugh. Let them scoff. He hadn't come to be recognized. He'd come to reclaim. And when the bidding started, they'd all learn one thing. You can't bury a legacy that knows how to bite. The lights dimmed to amber as the auctioneer tapped twice on the lacquered wood of the podium. All idle murmurs fell quiet. Glasses were lowered, postures straightened. "This," the man said with reverence, "is Lot 41, the crown of tonight's offering. Shadow's Valor." A hush followed, different than before. He hadn't even stepped onto the platform yet, but the room had already bent toward him, like a tide responding to a moon it couldn't see. Then he appeared. Escorted by a silent handler in black gloves, the dog moved with liquid precision across the carpeted runway. His paws made no sound. The leash held no tension. He didn't look around like the others had. He looked forward and stopped, right at the edge of the spotlight. Jonas rose slowly from his seat. He didn't notice his fingers digging into the velvet armrest. Didn't notice his breath catch. All he saw was that stance, weight balanced, ears pricked but not twitching, eyes like searchlights locked onto something beyond the crowd. Echo's posture, Echo's stillness, Echo's soul, but younger, sharper, more raw. Jonas's throat tightened. It was him. Not just a bloodline, not just genetics on paper. It was something deeper past, not through breeding charts or auction tags, but through instinct, through some sacred, invisible tether between warriors. That dog didn't just remind him of Echo. He carried him. "Name," Shadow's valor, the auctioneer began. 2 years old, trained under the Cole Elite Shepherd's Tactical Obedience Program. Dual certified in protection and scent discrimination. Sire, Cole's Phantom Shadow. Dam, Sovereign Astra. A pause. A theatrical clearing of the throat. Valor is the direct grandson of the famed Echo of the Wexler bloodline, although that name is no longer in circulation. Jonas felt a cold snap ripple through the ballroom. A few heads turned toward him, subtle as knives in the dark. But he didn't flinch. He just kept his eyes on the dog. On Valor. The bidding started high. $50,000, came the first voice, smooth, male, probably hedge fund money. $65,000, a woman from the lounge seats. $85,000, someone in the far left corner. Jonas didn't speak, not yet. He was watching something else. Valor hadn't moved, but his gaze had shifted, ever so slightly down the aisle, toward Jonas. It wasn't recognition, not the way humans understand it. It was awareness, the kind Echo used to have when Jonas walked into the training field, when there were 100 sounds, a dozen distractions, and yet he always knew where Jonas was. Valor's ears flicked back for a second. One paw inched forward, his nostrils flared. Jonas clenched his jaw. His hand slid into his pocket, fingers curling around the cool brass tag on Echo's old collar. $110,000. $130,000. $140,000. The numbers kept rising, but Jonas heard none of it. All he saw was that dog alone on a pedestal, surrounded by strangers who saw a price, not a pulse. He leaned forward, standing now, voice dry but steady. $200,000. The room froze. Eyes swiveled. Whispers flared. Even the auctioneer blinked. "Sir, do you have credentials on file?" Jonas stepped closer. "Cash. Certified. Ready now." There was a delay in the system, like the air had forgotten how to move. Darian Cole stood from his private lounge, arms crossed, wine glass forgotten. His smirk cracked just a little. Jonas locked eyes with him. "I'm buying him back," Jonas said, low but clear. "You've had your time with what's mine." The auctioneer stammered. We will have to confer." "Do that." On the platform, Valor had turned fully now. Not pulling, not reacting. Just watching Jonas. The handler twitched the leash, confused by the sudden stillness. Valor didn't budge, didn't blink. Jonas took one step forward. In that moment, the dog's head dipped almost imperceptibly, but Jonas saw it. A sign. A recognition not of face but of frequency. Blood knows blood. The auctioneer returned, face pale. "Bidding is closed. Lot 41 sold." A final tap of the gavel. Jonas exhaled. First breath he'd taken in what felt like a decade. It was done. But it was also just beginning. "Shall we begin?" the auctioneer said with an oily grin, tapping the gavel once more as the room's velvet hush returned. The spotlight still shone on Shadow's Valor, who hadn't moved since Jonas spoke. The air crackled with something electric, something ancient. Every eye shifted from the dog to the man who'd just dropped a number that silenced the wolves in suits. And then Darian Cole stood. The crowd turned with him, his presence magnetic, curated. He adjusted the cuff of his designer tux, the gold of his Rolex flashing beneath the chandeliers. He took 2 measured steps forward, wine glass in hand, voice coated in silk and venom. "Now, let's not be hasty," he purred. "Surely we haven't exhausted the interest of this refined crowd." He lifted his glass. "A working bloodline like this? the grandson of Echo? Come on, ladies and gentlemen. We can do better than 200 grand, can't we? A few nervous chuckles, a scattered ripple of murmured agreement. Let's say, he swirled his wine lazily, 250. The auctioneer perked up. Very well. Mr. Cole bids 250,000. But Jonas didn't move. He didn't blink. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and slowly, deliberately withdrew a leather envelope. It hit the table in front of him with a soft, heavy thud. He opened it with precision, no drama. Inside were banded stacks of $100 bills, neatly counted, aged but crisp, old money, not metaphorically, literally, from another life, from another war. I already told you, Jonas said, eyes fixed on Darian. I'm not bidding, I'm buying. He placed the stacks on the velvet-covered auction table, quietly, one after the other. 200,000, certified, count it if you need to. A silence fell so hard it echoed. The auctioneer swallowed. His hands hovered above the podium like he wasn't sure where to land them. He glanced toward Darian, then toward the staff near the curtain. I believe we have a qualified cash offer on the table, he stammered. Unless there are any other bids? Darian didn't speak. His jaw flexed, wine untouched, eyes narrowed. Jonas met his stare and held it. No bravado, no performance. Just history. Just resolve. From the crowd, someone finally whispered, "Is that Wexler?" Another voice followed. "I thought he was dead." Jonas didn't flinch, didn't answer. He wasn't here to explain himself. He wasn't here to relive the past. He was here for the dog. He turned to face Valor again, who had not shifted since their gaze locked. There was something holy in that silence, something defiant. The room had vanished. The chandeliers, the tuxedos, the perfume and pride and pretense. It was all gone. It was just Jonas and the dog, and the past. The auctioneer cleared his throat, voice trembling slightly. Going once, a beat. Going twice, another pause. Longer this time, as if fate itself were stalling. Sold. The gavel came down. The room didn't erupt. It didn't gasp or clap. It exhaled, like something heavy had passed through it and left the walls trembling. Jonas stepped forward as Valor was led from the stage. The handler looked confused, uncertain whether to release him or ask for confirmation. But Valor didn't wait. The moment Jonas came within reach, the dog stepped forward, uncoaxed, and pressed his muzzle gently to the side of Jonas's hand. Not a jump, not a lick. Just contact. Deliberate. Soft. Final. Jonas's fingers hovered, shaking just slightly, before they curled slowly around Valor's neck. No leash. No order. Just gravity. Behind them, Darian's voice cracked the silence like a blade. "You're wasting him," he snapped. "That dog was built for power, for contracts. You're throwing away the most valuable animal on this coast." Jonas turned, his voice quiet. "He's not yours." Then he looked at the auctioneer. "Paperwork. Now." Outside, as they stepped into the cool night air, Jonas felt it fully, the weight of what had just happened, of what had been recovered, not just a dog, not just bloodline, but a fragment of Echo, of Aiden, of everything they had stood for. Valor walked at his side, head level with Jonas's hip, silent as the dead. But his eyes were alive. And somewhere deep inside, Jonas felt something stir, something that hadn't moved in years. Not vengeance, not pride. Hope. The engine hummed low beneath a black sky laced with stars, the kind of darkness that swallowed roads and memory alike. Jonas Wexler drove in silence, hands at 10 and 2, knuckles pale under the dashboard's soft amber glow. In the rear-view mirror, eyes, not blinking, not fidgeting, just watching. Valor didn't make a sound, didn't whine, didn't pant. His ears twitched at every shift of wind, every flicker of movement beyond the headlights. But he stayed seated, poised, alert, like a soldier off duty but never off guard. It was uncanny, too still for a young dog, too measured. Jonas had known shepherds his whole life, bred them, raised them, buried them. But this wasn't normal obedience. This was memory. Echo had been like that too. The thought hit harder than he expected. He turned onto the winding two-lane highway that would take them north, toward the pine thickets, and washed out gravel that led to the cabin. Civilization faded in the rear view, one streetlight at a time. "Long way home, huh?" Jonas muttered under his breath, more to himself than to the dog. But Valor's ear swiveled toward the sound. No tail wag, no bark, just listening. Jonas nodded, almost smiling. "You don't trust me yet," he said. "That's fair. I wouldn't trust me either." Wind battered the sides of the truck in short bursts. Old maps fluttered from the glove box, forgotten receipts wedged between pages of a battered field manual Jonas had written back in '03, still bearing his son's initials in pencil on the cover, A.W. He reached down and turned off the radio. Silence settled again, thicker now. Not awkward, not empty, just full of things neither man nor dog could say. He glanced in the rear view again. Valor was still staring not at Jonas, but out the passenger window, eyes tracking the dark shapes of trees as they blurred past, like ghosts. "You remind me of him," Jonas said quietly, his voice gravel wrapped in regret. Not a flinch, not a reaction. But Jonas swore, Valor's chest rose just slightly, as if taking in something heavier than air. He gripped the wheel harder. "They said Echo was KIA, Jonas continued, "buried with Aiden. But I knew something was off. No remains, no ID chip, just silence." He hesitated. "Until tonight. The name had weight. Echo." The dog didn't respond, but the name felt alive in the cab, like an old friend sitting quietly in the back seat. At a gas station in the middle of nowhere, Jonas parked beneath a flickering overhead light. He stepped out slowly, knees stiff from the years. He opened the back door, but didn't reach for a leash. "Come on." Valor stepped out on his own, not hesitant, not aggressive, just measured. Jonas grabbed a plastic bottle of water and an old travel bowl from the truck bed. He poured carefully. No sudden moves. Valor sat, watched. "You thirsty or just polite?" Jonas asked. The dog didn't move. But when Jonas turned away and walked a few feet toward the bench, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Steady, unrushed. Then a pause. A slurp. Water. Not a gulp. Not desperate. Disciplined. Jonas sat down on the bench, the kind with chipped paint and a metal plaque from 1987. He stared at the stars above the rusted roofline, mind wandering places it hadn't dared in years. "You're not just his blood," Jonas whispered. "You carry something more." He didn't say soul. That was too big a word. But presence? Yes. That lingered in the way Valor didn't act like a puppy. in the way he didn't need commands, in the way he looked at the world not with fear, but with memory. Back in the cab, as they started the last leg of the drive, Jonas spoke again, this time more to himself. I should have never let Darien near the bloodline. I told Aiden we'd protect it, that it meant more than money. He exhaled, bitter. And I failed. From the back seat came a sound so soft it could have been imagined a faint woof of breath. Not quite a sigh, not quite a growl, just acknowledgement. The cabin appeared like a shadow cut into the trees, familiar, weary, the last refuge of a man who'd tried to vanish. Jonas parked the truck and didn't move for a moment. Then he looked back. You're home now, he said. Valor didn't leap with joy, didn't bolt from the truck. He simply followed, step for step, up the gravel path, into the quiet of a place that still smelled of Echo's collar, tucked on the mantel above the fireplace, like a gravestone. No one dared move. Jonas watched as Valor entered and paused. He sniffed the air once, twice. His tail gave a single, subtle sway. Then he laid down on the rug, exactly where Echo used to sleep. Jonas stood in the doorway, stunned, and for the first time in years his eyes welled. Not because of pain, but because something lost had started to find its way home. Morning came slow over the valley mist, rising in thin white tendrils across the earth like breath from a long-forgotten mouth. Jonas stood by the truck, hand resting on the rusted gate, its iron bars streaked with orange where time had gnawed the paint away. The sign still hung, crooked, Wexler K9, Training Grounds. The words were barely legible now, faded by rain and regret. He hadn't seen this place in nearly 8 years, hadn't dared. Not since the day he handed over the deed, the name, the bloodline, and walked away from everything Aiden died believing in. Jonas reached into his coat and pulled out a key. It was old, cold. He held it in his palm like a question before sliding it into the lock. It resisted, then gave with a reluctant click. The gate creaked open, slow and loud, disturbing crows from the trees. Valor stepped forward behind him, one paw on the gravel, then another cautious, not hesitant, as if he knew this was no ordinary ground. This was sacred. The main path was overrun with weeds and wild thistle. The concrete was cracked, split by time and roots that had crept in while no one was watching. Jonas walked with care, boots crunching dry leaves, each step like treading over bones. To his left, the training yard, once pristine, lined with cones and sandbags and agility tracks. Now, a graveyard of purpose. Tunnels collapsed, platforms rotted, the old bite-sleeve dummies slumped in corners like discarded corpses, and beyond it all, the kennel block. Jonas stopped. His breath caught in his throat, not from the cold but from the weight of memory, of failure. He looked at the row of small metal doors, 10 units, 5 on each side. He'd built them by hand with Aiden one summer. Every bolt was a story, every latch a promise. Now vines crawled through the fencing like veins. Spiderwebs laced the corners. Rust had painted everything the color of dried blood, but the air still smelled faintly of sawdust, of pine bedding, of— Jonas closed his eyes, of Echo. Valor moved ahead, head low, nose twitching. He padded between the kennels slowly, like walking through a battlefield. He paused in front of the third door on the right. That had been Echo's. He sat, just sat. Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. He walked up beside him and crouched. The nameplate was still there, faded but intact. Echo, 007. He brushed the rust away with the sleeve of his jacket, exposing the worn steel underneath. "Used to be the best damn nose in the program," he murmured. "Could catch a scent in a hurricane." Valor didn't move. Jonas glanced at him, then at the kennel, and without thinking, he unlatched the door. It squealed open, empty, but not silent. Jonas stepped inside, ducking his head. The walls still had claw marks near the corner where Echo used to stretch after long runs. A chew toy, molded from Kevlar, sat half buried in dust. He bent down, picked it up. Still intact, still waiting. He didn't realize his hands were trembling until he tried to place the toy back down, and it slipped, hitting the ground with a soft thud. He stayed kneeling for a long time. Then quietly, "I shouldn't have left." Outside, Valor let out a low chuff, not a bark, just agreement. Jonas stood. His knees popped. He turned and looked at the rest of the kennels, all 10 of them. "I trained legends here," he said aloud. Not pride, just fact. "Ghost, Dagger, Luna, Echo." His voice faltered. "And then Darien turned it all into a breeding factory. Genetic royalty for show dogs and private security firms." He clenched his jaw. "Not what we built it for." He crossed the path to the main structure, the operations shed. The door groaned open. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and forgotten ambition. On the far wall, the old Wexler family creed was still barely visible, stenciled in faded red. Loyalty, instinct, purpose. He reached for the light switch out of habit and was stunned when a single bulb flickered to life. Electricity still worked. Or maybe something didn't want to die just yet. He moved to the desk, brushed away a layer of dust, revealing a photo frame. Aiden and Echo, side by side, smiling, young, full of fire. Jonas picked it up. His reflection in the glass startled him. Older now, gray in his beard, lines around the eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. He set the photo down, gently, then turned back toward the door. Valor stood there, not wagging, not moving, just watching. Jonas nodded. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "It's time." Outside, the sun had started to rise through the trees, casting gold across the ruined yard. Jonas looked at the kennels, at the cracked training field, at the rusting gate, then at Valor. And something in him shifted, not healed, not yet, but awake. He inhaled, slow and full, and spoke again, not to Valor, not to Echo, not even to Aiden, but to the silence itself. "We rebuild." The afternoon light had mellowed into amber, soft as memory. Long shadows crawled across the gravel path as wind stirred the dead leaves like voices too faint to hear. Jonas stood alone in the old supply shed, door half open, hinges groaning gently in the breeze. Dust particles danced in the sunlight like ash in the air, weightless, timeless. Behind him, the silence of the yard was broken by the light padding of paws. Valor. The young German shepherd stepped inside without hesitation, nose working the air with laser focus. Something had pulled him here, something old, something buried beneath time and silence. Jonas turned as the dog nosed through a pile of collapsed crates in the corner. His instincts kicked in. Careful, there's nails, glass. But Valor was deliberate, surgical. He pawed gently at a half-collapsed box, then bit the edge and pulled. From beneath layers of moldy cloth and disintegrated packaging foam, something fell free. It hit the floor with a muted thump. Canvas, thick, faded. Jonas froze. It was a vest. A tactical K9 vest worn, frayed at the edges, its straps stiff from years of neglect. The Wexler insignia still faintly visible on the left side. On the right, hand-stitched in blocky black thread, Echo 007. Jonas didn't move. His throat tightened. Heat bloomed in his chest like something tearing open from the inside. He took one hesitant step forward, then knelt. He picked up the vest with both hands, slowly, like holding a sacred artifact. It still smelled faintly of cedar oil and something else. His vision blurred. He traced the stitching with a trembling finger. "Damn you, boy," he whispered. "You kept everything." The weight of it, the loss, the guilt, the years crashed through the dam he didn't know he'd built. And Jonas, hard-edged, stone-faced, silent for 8 years, Jonas broke. The vest fell from his lap as he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around Valor, burying his face into the thick fur at the dog's neck. And for the first time since Echo died, he wept. Not a few tears, not the silent, dignified grief of a man who's known loss too long. He sobbed. Full body, ugly, cracked open like a shell too long under pressure. He clung to Valor like a lifeline, as if the young dog were holding him together by sheer gravity. And Valor didn't move. He didn't pull away or bristle. He simply stood there, still and breathing slow, like he understood. Like something ancient inside him remembered the shape of Jonas's pain. His head turned slightly, nuzzling against the man's shoulder, gentle, grounding. A gesture Echo used to do after storms. Jonas's voice finally returned in fragments, spoken against fur. "I tried to let it go. I swear. I walked away. I buried him, right?" Said the words. And I thought if I just stayed away long enough, maybe the pain would dull. He laughed, a sound that caught halfway between sorrow and shame. But it never did. He pulled back slowly, wiping at his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket. The tears had carved trails down his weather-worn face, cutting through years of dust and indifference. Jonas looked Valor in the eyes. Those same eyes, steel gray, rimmed in gold. "I don't know how the hell you got his eyes," he murmured. "I don't even care." He reached down and picked up the vest again. "Maybe you're not him," Jonas said softly, "but you brought him back." He held the vest to his chest, breathing it in. Or maybe he never left. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the trees, tugging at the weeds in the training yard. A hawk cried in the distance. The shed door swung wider on its rusted hinge. Light streamed in, landing square on the Wexler crest hanging from the rafters. Valor turned toward it, then back to Jonas. He took a step forward and sat at the man's feet, back straight, eyes forward, a perfect heel, just like Echo used to. Jonas choked back another surge of emotion. He knelt again, gently slipping the vest over Valor's back. The straps were loose. Echo had been larger, but the fit was close enough. He stepped back to look, and for a breathless moment, it was as if time bent, as if the past had circled back to meet the present. There stood a young shepherd in the light, Echo's vest across his shoulders, his eyes alert, posture proud. Jonas whispered, barely audible, "Welcome home." The dawn didn't rise so much as it unfolded slow and pale, brushing the old Wexler compound in muted gold. Mist clung low over the grass, curling along the worn concrete paths where the footfalls of greatness once echoed. Jonas stood at the edge of the field again, boot soles planted in the same earth where he'd once trained legends. His hands were empty. No whistle, no clicker, no leash, just silence. And valor. The young shepherd stood a few feet away, still wearing Echo's vest like a birthright. His stance wasn't perfect yet. Too eager in the shoulders, too quick to shift weight. But there was fire in the way he waited. Not just attention. Readiness. Jonas took a breath. "This isn't for ribbons," he said quietly. Valor tilted his head. "We're not doing show circuits, not obedience titles, not flash." He took a step forward, locking eyes with the dog. "This is about trust." He raised one hand, didn't speak, didn't snap, just waited. Valor didn't move. Jonas held the pose, breathing slow. 10 seconds, 20. Then, just a twitch of fingers. Valor sat, flawless. Jonas didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Good. For the next hour they worked in silence. No verbal cues, no harsh corrections. Just a dance, slow, deliberate, and almost reverent. Jonas would shift, and Valor would adjust. Jonas would walk, and Valor would follow, not because he was told, but because something invisible tethered them. There was no yelling, no domination, only listening. Later, Jonas brought out the wooden baton, not for striking, but as a relic. Echo's old focus tool. He placed it on the ground. "Leave it," he said, then turned and walked away. He didn't look back. Didn't have to. 20 yards out, he turned around. Valor hadn't moved. Eyes locked on Jonas, not the baton. That alone was enough to pull something tight in Jonas's chest. Echo had mastered that test by 5 months. Valor was nearly there. Different blood, same fire. The next lesson came that afternoon, in the old warehouse where ghosts lingered in every corner. Jonas opened the side door. The room still smelled faintly of rubber mats, old sweat, and cedar oil. He walked to the center of the mat, dropped to one knee, and tapped his chest once. "Here." Valor approached, uncertain. Jonas waited. When the dog was within arm's reach, he whispered, "Down." Valor hesitated, then slowly lowered himself, one limb at a time, into a crouch. Head high, still watching. Jonas exhaled. Close enough. He placed a hand gently on the dog's shoulder. There was no tension, just warmth. Outside, wind rippled the faded flag above the compound gate, half torn, but still clinging to its post. Inside, a man and a dog breathed in rhythm. No audience, no stopwatch, just the rhythm of something ancient being remembered. As evening fell, they stood atop the training tower. The valley stretched out below, bathed in twilight. Cicadas hummed in the brush. Somewhere in the hills, a lone coyote called. Jonas leaned on the railing. Valor stood beside him, tail still, ears alert. "You remind me of Aiden." He didn't expect a reaction, but Valor turned his head slightly at the name, just a flicker of recognition, as if the air around it vibrated differently. Jonas nodded slowly. "Aiden trained Echo. back when I still thought dogs were tools. He changed that. He glanced down at the vest Valor still wore. Echo taught me how to listen, not just command. That's the difference, you know, between control and connection. He looked at Valor again. I'm not here to make you obey. His voice was low now, barely above the wind. I'm here to earn your trust. They didn't go inside that night. They stayed under the stars. Jonas sat on the steps of the tower. Valor curled at his feet, one eye open, one ear twitching at every night sound. The compound, once roaring with drills and barking and shouted commands, had found a new rhythm. Quiet, intentional, sacred. And in that silence, something began to bloom, not training, not conditioning, but a bond. The wind had changed. Jonas felt it before he saw anything, just a faint tension in the air, like the woods were holding their breath. He stood at the edge of the porch, mug in hand, watching the tree line. Valor sat beside him, still as a statue, but the fur between his shoulder blades bristled. Jonas didn't speak, didn't have to. Valor's low growl said it all. A sound so deep, so primal, it felt like it came from the bones, not the throat. Jonas set the mug down, slow, quiet, then stepped off the porch and walked the path toward the gravel road. The sun had just dropped behind the ridge, casting the forest in bruised shades of indigo. Shadows lengthened. The last gold of day clung to the tops of the pines like memory. That's when he saw it. A black car, parked just beyond the bend, partially hidden by brush. Engine off, lights out, no plates. Jonas froze, then took 2 careful steps forward. The driver's silhouette was just visible through the tinted windshield camera lens resting on the edge of the window, angled toward the property. Click. Another photo. Jonas took a 3rd step. The car roared to life. Reverse lights flared. Tires spun gravel. Then the car was gone, vanishing around the corner in a spray of dust and pine needles. By the time Jonas reached the edge of the road, there was nothing but tail lights smearing red into the trees. He stood there a long moment, listening, breathing, trying to quiet the roar building in his chest. Back at the gate he saw the prints. Boot treads. Deep, recent. Not just car tracks footprints. Someone had come through the outer perimeter on foot, close enough to see the house, close enough to watch him. He crouched, ran 2 fingers through the dirt, studying the pattern. Wide set, heavy. Not a hiker's pace, a stalker's. Valor moved up beside him, nose low to the ground. He let out a sharp snort, then looked up at Jonas' eyes, alert, questioning. Jonas gave a single nod. Yeah, he muttered. I smell it too. Inside the house he pulled out the old lockbox beneath the kitchen sink. Not the one with money, the other one. The one with the .45. He hadn't touched it in years. But his hands remembered the weight like muscle memory. He checked the chamber, loaded, then clicked the safety on and placed it on the table. His eyes drifted to the far wall where Echo's collar still hung like a ghost on a nail. You were right, he whispered. They never stop watching. That night, the compound felt different. Not unsafe, just awake. The shadows were too still, the wind too careful. Even the birds held their breath. Jonas sat by the window, one hand resting on the pistol, the other on Valor's back. The dog didn't sleep, didn't blink, just stared into the dark, ears rotating like radar. Sometime after midnight, the motion sensor lights outside flickered once, then twice. Jonas was on his feet before the second flicker died. Valor rose with him, muscles taut. They stepped onto the porch together. Nothing moved. But the night smelled of exhaust and pine and something bitter. Then, at the gate, just beyond the reach of the light, Jonas saw it. A single white envelope, pinned to the fence post with a small nail. He approached slowly, Valor at his side. The envelope had no stamp, no name, just one word, handwritten on the front. Wexler. Jonas's jaw locked. He didn't open it. Not yet. He turned back toward the house, the letter clutched in one hand, Valor walking perfectly in step beside him. Eyes forward, back straight, like Echo used to, like a soldier returning to formation. Whatever peace had bloomed here was gone. Something had found them, something that remembered his name, and wanted him to remember it too. The morning came cold. Mist hung low over the training field, coiling through the grass like ghosts reluctant to let go. Dew shimmered on the rusted gates of the old Wexler facility, and birdsong returned in uncertain notes, quiet as if testing whether it was safe to begin again. Jonas stood at the far edge of the field, clipboard in one hand, the other resting on the shoulder of a German shepherd who now sat in perfect heel position. The sun broke through slowly, casting gold across the dog's coat. The light caught in his eyes, amber with green flecks, the same pattern Jonas once saw in Echoes during the last trial in Prague. But this dog didn't need to prove himself to the world, only to the man who knelt beside him, and the ghosts that watched from every blade of grass. Jonas took a breath, then pulled out the pen. On the top of the registration form, beneath the box that said, "Name of Handler," he scrawled his own with a steady hand, Jonas Wexler. And below that, after a pause that felt like a benediction, he wrote the name he'd been carrying in his heart since the auction. Wexler's Valor. Not Shadow's Valor, not a number or code or pedigree string, but a name that bound the dog to something bigger than blood, to legacy, to survival, to defiance. Jonas didn't believe in reincarnation. Not really. But as Valor turned to look at him, head tilted just slightly, like Echo used to do when reading Wind, Jonas felt the hair on the back of his neck rise, like someone else was there, like the past was nodding its approval. He brought the papers into town that afternoon. The county clerk looked up as he stepped through the door. Confused for a second, then clearly recognizing the name on the envelope he handed over. "Wexler?" She blinked. "As in the Wexler dogs?" Jonas gave a quiet nod. She didn't ask more. People knew better than to stir ashes that still smoldered. 30 minutes later, it was done. Valor was no longer a ghost. He had a legal name, a file, a microchip number tied to the Wexler bloodline, the last one registered in over 8 years, and with it, a message sent like a flare into the quiet sky. We are not extinct. On the way back, Jonas stopped by the old sign at the gate. It was faded now, the paint peeling and warped, the lettering barely visible. But beneath the dust, it still read, "Wexler Canine Trust. In dogs we find the truth." Jonas stared at it for a long moment, then took out his pocket knife. He didn't repaint the sign. He didn't rebuild the gate. He simply carved one line into the wooden post beneath it. Valor lives here. That night, as the stars came out, Jonas sat by the kennel yard with a fire crackling low in the barrel beside him. Valor lay at his feet, curled tightly, but not asleep. His ears flicked with every distant coyote yelp, every rustle of wind. Jonas ran a hand over his head, slow, thoughtful. "You don't have to be him," he said softly. "You're not Echo. You're not a symbol. You're not a savior." He paused. "But the name you carry, it matters." Valor lifted his head, that tilt again, a whisper of recognition in silence. Jonas's voice dropped to a whisper. "Wexler dogs don't run. We don't hide. And we don't forget." From the porch the old collar still hung. Its brass tag had gone dull with years of weather, but when the moonlight struck it just right, one could still make out the engraving. Echo. Underneath the phrase Jonas had once etched during a drunken midnight in Kiev. Trust begins in the quiet. He watched Valor rise and walk over to it. No command, no cue. The dog simply sat beneath the collar, looked up at it, then back at Jonas. It wasn't worship, it was memory. Somewhere, in marrow or spirit or spark, something was being passed down. Not as inheritance, but as invitation. "Yeah," Jonas whispered. "You feel it too, don't you?" He walked over and crouched beside him. For a long time they stayed there, man and dog, silent beneath the name of a legend. No words, no tricks, just presence, and the sound of a wind that seemed to say, "Begin again." The knock was soft, uncertain. Jonas had just come in from drills, sweat drying on his back. Valor lay by the door, alert but calm. He opened it, and time folded. "Lena," he breathed. She stood there like memory in motion, same wind-blown hair, same eyes, grief and defiance. Jonas hadn't seen her since Aiden's funeral, since the trial, since the lies. Now she was back, holding a manila envelope and a silver drive. They sat at the old kitchen table. Valor paced nearby, silent as shadow. Lena didn't touch her tea. "I'm not here for redemption," she said. "I saw what Darian did, and I can't be part of it anymore." "You worked with him." "I helped bury Echo's file, helped dissolve the Wexler trust. I stayed silent. I compromised." Jonas glanced at the drive. "What's on it?" "Echo's last GPS logs, trial footage, a memo from the day Aiden died." Her voice shook. "They knew Echo was unstable. Darian ran the test anyway, then blamed you." Jonas said nothing. "He used me to bury you," she whispered. Through the window, Valor checked the fence line like always. "I don't know what to do with this," Lena said, "but you deserve the truth." "Why now?" "Because he's building something worse, Project Reverb." She handed him photos. Dogs with cranial ports, branded flanks. "Shock-triggered loyalty. Memory rewriting," she said. "They're building it outside Las Cruces. Dr. Grover Lang is leading it." Jonas stiffened. "I need that site." "You'll never get in through the front. They're private now. That makes them arrogant. You're risking your life." "I don't care." On the porch, as the sun dipped low, she paused. "I never stopped loving him, you know." Jonas said nothing. "And Valor, he moves like Echo." "He's not Echo," Jonas said, "but he carries the name. That means something." "I hope it still means enough." She drove away, dust trailing behind her. Inside, Jonas plugged in the drive. Valor sat beside him, silent. Jonas touched his collar. Valor, not just a name, a vow. And war was coming. She returned the next evening. This time she brought files, registry forgeries, ghost dogs, fabricated bloodlines tracing back to Echo, though they didn't. "So, Valor?" Jonas asked. "He's real. That's what makes him dangerous. Darien hunted him. He flagged as too close to Echo's genetic markers. They thought the bloodline had died." She opened another file. White Basin, a rebranded facility. Neuroplasticity experiments, the one Aiden tried to expose, now under a new name. Stonewell Biogenetics, same funders. Jonas read it, numb. "Echo didn't die in a failed op," Lena said. "He died because he resisted." Jonas clenched his fists. "They broke him, then buried it." "You always thought it was your fault," Lena said. "It wasn't. He chose defiance." She pulled a final photo Echo in his prime beside Aiden. On the back, Aiden had written, "They can strip a dog's voice, but not his soul. Echo still hears the truth." "I want to testify," Lena said. "To who?" "To anyone who'll listen. But I need you. They'll come for you." "They already did." She revealed a scar. "I noticed. I survived." "You're staying here," Jonas said. "That's not why I came." "You are. You're under this roof now." That night, while she slept in Aiden's old room, Jonas walked the fence with Valor. They don't want control. They want to rewrite the bloodline. Valor looked up, eyes burning gold. "Not on my watch," Jonas said. Later, by the fire, the storm passed quietly. Jonas stood with a drink. Lena curled on the couch, wrapped in an old blanket. Between them, a memory drive. He slid it into the laptop. Aiden appeared, not a message, just a training clip. Echo sat beside him, head tilted, poised. "Mark." Echo moved like wind precision, grace. "That's my boy," Aiden said, grinning. Clip after clip. Drills, scent retrieval, field work, a birthday, a cupcake, a party hat on Echo's head, laughter, life. "I thought I hated you," Lena whispered. Jonas turned. "For leaving after the tribunal. For letting them bury him." "I hated me too," Jonas said. "But now I know the truth. And it hurts worse." They sat together, not close, but close enough. "He used to write poems," Lena said, smiling faintly. "I remember one," Jonas said, "about a tree and a dog, made no sense. That was the point. He wrote to remember." Jonas stared at the screen. "I should have saved him." "You couldn't," Lena said. "Echo bit that aid to save a child. Darien used it. Aiden was never getting out. He died for truth. And they turned it into a warning." Outside, Valor walked the porch. Inside, they let themselves feel it. Lena pressed pause. Aiden's smile froze, his hand on Echo's head. Jonas whispered, "He'd love Valor. He'd see Echo in him. I already do." They sat in silence. By the time Lena went to bed, only embers glowed. Jonas stayed, staring. He tapped play. The final clip. Aiden adjusted Echo's collar, scratched behind his ears, whispered, "If they ever try to erase you, make sure someone remembers. Even if it's just one person, one dog." Jonas didn't cry. He just closed the laptop and whispered, "I remember." It started with the scent, acrid, bitter, wrong. Jonas and Valor were returning from the creek trail when he noticed the limp, then the smear of blood, then the smoke. He sprinted. The barn door was open, carefully, not forced. Inside it wasn't chaos. It was calculated. Aiden's training logs gone, breed maps, progression charts, burned. His locked laptop? Missing. On the center beam, carved deep into the cedar. Stay dead. Valor growled, eyes fixed on broken glass near the kennels. Jonas crouched, shattered syringe. Empty. He didn't need tests to know. This was a message. He checked Valor's wound. Clean slice. Precise. Not random. "Did they do this to you, boy?" Jonas whispered. Valor said nothing, but the way he held his head told Jonas everything. By noon, the sheriff was gone. "No forced entry," he said. No urgency. Just tired warnings about old enemies. Jonas hadn't called for justice. He called to draw a line. That night, Jonas held Valor's head in his hands. "If this is the fight, are you ready for it?" Valor just looked back. "I never left." Inside, Lena backed up the flash drive clouds. Safes, fail-safes. "They'll come again," she said. "I'm counting on it," Jonas replied. He rebuilt what he could. Slashed dummies, burned patch. He saved the remains, not to mourn, to remember. By midnight, Valor stood watch. Bandaged, motionless, not guarding territory, guarding legacy. Jonas wrote in his old notebook, "They tried to erase us, not with bullets, with silence." He closed it and whispered, "Let them come." He drove 4 hours into the mountains. No GPS, only memory. The cabin looked abandoned, but it was by design. Charlie Mercer opened the door before Jonas even knocked. "Ghosts knocking?" "Brought a shepherd," Jonas replied. Charlie saw Valor. "Wexler line?" "Last of them." "Then get in. We've got a war to map." Inside, maps, ammo casings, sealed hard drives. Jonas handed over the drive. "Someone burned my barn. Cut Valor. Left a warning." "You think it's coal?" "I think it's Cerberus tactical." Charlie's fingers flew. Within minutes, encrypted contracts, shell companies, and one phrase that froze Jonas. "Legacy threats are to be monitored and neutralized." "They're talking about dogs," Jonas said. Charlie shook his head. "No, they're talking about you." Jonas stepped outside. The ash smell was in his memory now. "I thought this was about Valor, about legacy." "It is," Charlie said. "But what you built was a weapon. Adaptive cognition under pressure. Wexler wasn't training. It was evolution. And Cole doesn't control what's left." Charlie handed over agent lists and files. "Don't use email. Don't go back alone." "I'm not alone." Jonas nodded toward Valor. Before they parted, Charlie warned, "Once you ring the bell, no turning back." Jonas answered, "I rang it the day I pulled Valor from that cage." On the road, Jonas whispered, "They turned legacy into liability. But we don't run." He glanced at the dark road behind them. "They started this. Now we finish it." Elsewhere, Lena sat on a motel bed, a laptop casting pale light. She dragged the file into an encrypted folder, attached it to an email. To Eva Price, banned journalist turned truth-teller. No subject, no message. Just a file, a note. "You wanted the truth. This is how it begins." She hit send. The video hit the internet at 6:43 a.m. No music, no voiceover, just raw footage. Cages, A dog whimpering, Darian Cole's voice. Double the dose, he's still resisting. But, sir, you want funding or a conscience? A restrained shepherd. Metadata stamped Ray 2. Wexler line. Experimental, combat, obedience protocol. Then black. Eva didn't claim credit. She released it anonymously through watchdog forums she'd built for years. The caption, "What happens to the dogs who don't make the news?" And below, "There's a reason the Wexler bloodline disappeared." By noon, it had gone viral. Cut RA2, Justice for Echo, shut down. Cole K9 veterans, trainers, vets, comment threads exploded. Stories of discharged dogs that disappeared. NDAs. Silence cracking. Jonas saw it from a cracked phone in a cafe. The barista whispered, "Isn't this one of yours?" Jonas didn't reply. He just watched. Again and again. Valor sat at his feet, still. That night in the barn, Lena handed Jonas a second drive. The full dump? What I leaked was just the start. He held it carefully. "You did the right thing." She nodded, exhausted. "Right doesn't mean safe." From the shadows, Valor growled low, then settled. Somewhere far away, Darian Cole watched the clip in silence. His assistant stammered, "We flagged it as fake, but it's not catching." Cole said only, "Then find the leak and kill the noise." Back at the cabin, Jonas buried the drive beneath the ash panel in the wood stove. Not to burn, to protect. "We're not done," he said. Lena nodded. "They're not used to people fighting back." Outside, the wind rose. Inside, Valor watched the door. And for the first time in years, the truth had teeth. And it had begun to bite. It began just before dawn. No sirens, no shouting, just boots on concrete and terse radio commands. 2 federal teams moved at once. One outside Raleigh, one at a warehouse near Austin. On the outside, clean signs, trimmed hedges, security cameras. Inside, the rot ran deep. "Execute!" Doors breached. "Federal agents! Hands in the air!" Chaos inside. Syringes dropped. Screams. But agents pushed past decoys and into the heart, where the cages were. Rows of them. Steel. Silent. Then came the sounds, whimpers, scratching, one-horse bark. A German shepherd stood trembling, patches of fur missing. Tag read, Ray 5. No growl, no fight. Just a stare. Resigned. The footage leaked within hours. Not polished PR raw body cam clips. Dogs limping, forged records, altered vaccines, and the name at the bottom, Cole K9 Holdings. Online, outrage exploded. Justice for Valor. Shut down. Cole. Echo Protocol. Dogs aren't weapons. Protests outside Cole's Maryland Center. Former handlers, students, parents, veterans. All standing, not screaming. Their silence thundered. At his cabin, Jonas stood watching footage on his phone, Valor beside him. "They're finally seeing it," he said to Lena, who'd quietly joined. She asked, "But will they believe it?" He looked at Valor. "They have to. This time, the truth has proof. And names." At the DOJ, pressure mounted. Lawmakers called for hearings. One congresswoman, a former canine handler, said, "These are war crimes against animals." Darian Cole vanished. Denials were issued. No one listened. Jonas rested a hand on Valor's head. They tried to break you, make you a number. Valor stayed steady. But now they know your name. That night someone tied lilies to Jonas's gate. No note, just a folded paper Valor's original registration, RAE 3, where it read, "Retired, deceased." Someone had crossed it out and wrote, "He's still here." The courthouse smelled like varnish and tension. Jonas adjusted his collar in the mirror. Outside, protesters chanted. Valor waited by the steps, barred from court, but present, like he knew what this was. Legacy. Inside, Darian Cole sat stone-faced. Jonas entered. A hush followed. Lena sat quietly, sealed folder in hand. They didn't look at each other. They didn't need to. "State your name." Jonas Wexler. The name still echoed more than a bloodline, a belief. He confirmed years of training, oversaw Aiden's final class, but the real blow came with the photos. Dogs with surgical scars, falsified logs, videos of collapse. Jonas's voice cracked once. "These weren't enhancements," he said. "They were violations." The defense pushed back, called it bias, a legacy grudge. But when Lena's footage played the raids, the cries, the blood-legal spin couldn't mask it. These weren't assets. They were dogs, and Valor had survived them all. Then Lena took the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch, even when her secret recording played Cole's voice. "Then bury it, Lena, or I bury you." The silence that followed was electric. "You believe your life was threatened?" "Yes, but I'm more afraid of what happens if I stay quiet." Court recessed. Jonas stepped outside, breath slow. At the bottom of the steps, Valor, still, proud, waiting. A little girl approached, 10 years old, trembling, holding a drawing of a shepherd with a scar. Beneath it, "I believe you." Jonas knelt. "She drew this for you." And Valor softly touched it with his nose. That night, back at the cabin, a candle burned beside Aiden's photo. Jonas placed the testimony and an old scorched collar nearby. Outside, the wind whispered like breath over an old battlefield. No verdict yet, but truth had taken the stand. The trial stalled. Delays, motions, legal red tape. But the public didn't wait. A photo of Valor sitting outside the courthouse went viral. The caption, "If Valor can wait, so can we." Sponsors fled Cole's empire, food suppliers, GPS brands, even tactical canine certifiers suspended him. It wasn't PR, it was exile. Valor, unaware, napped by the fire. Jonas's inbox flooded. Veterans, families, survivors. One read, "We were told my canine died of bad genetics. Now I know it wasn't. I'm willing to testify." Another, "They said she wasn't worth saving." She was. Redemption wasn't his. It was theirs. At dawn, Valor stirred. Jonas followed him outside. A car approached. Henry, retired handler, once Echo's partner. He stepped out and handed Jonas something wrapped in worn cloth. Echo's collar. Belonged to him. Should stay in the line. Jonas took it in silence, heavy with memory. Valor sniffed it once, then looked up, eyes steady. By Sunday, Lena returned, breathless. One of Cole's assistants flipped. Jonas didn't smile, but something rooted shifted. He turned his screen to her, an interview. A woman's voice cracked. "They took my Wexler shepherd. Said he wasn't worth fixing. His name was Bishop. I still have his ashes." This wasn't a case anymore. It was a reckoning. That night, Jonas walked to the old oak, Echo's collar in one hand, Valor's new registration in the other. He nailed them beside Aiden's memorial. A vow. Train not for obedience, train for bond, and the bond will carry you beyond the grave. Valor lay in the grass nearby, scar hidden under thick fur, eyes bright, not a project, not a weapon, but a witness, a survivor. A dog who waited at the foot of justice and was seen. By Monday, news vans lined the road. Podcast requests, donation offers. A vet offered funding to restart a proper Wexler facility for rehab, not revenue. Jonas ignored the noise. He didn't want fame. He wanted restoration. He wanted dogs like Valor, like Echo, to stand again. The court still owed a ruling, but the people already had theirs. Not forgotten, not broken, just waiting to be restored. It began with a wheelbarrow, rusty, lopsided, groaning with memory. Jonas found it behind the barn's same spot Aiden once stacked fencing posts. He flipped it, cleared out spiders, and began hauling debris from the old training wing. No speeches, just a man, a barn, and a whispered promise. He didn't hear the first truck. By the time he looked up, there were 3 veterans, men who knew the name Wexler from bruises and fields, not brochures. One stepped forward, dark beard, limp, hidden. "You rebuilding this place?" Jonas nodded. The man dropped a tool bag. "Then let's rebuild." They came in waves. A mother and son who once fostered canines, a flunked-out trainer from Idaho, a girl with cochlear implants and a quiet collie mix. No one asked for pay, just names, of dogs, of each other, of Aiden, the boy who dreamed of a place where dogs weren't judged by scars, but by spirit. Lena arrived on day 3. Shorter hair, same fire in her eyes. "This place needs structure," she said, sidestepping Valor. "You saying my barn needs bureaucracy? I'm saying we need grant forms." He handed her a hammer. She handed him a clipboard. They got to work. By week's end, the South Kennel, once Echo's, was cleaned and renamed Valor Row. Each stall bore a name, not a number. Honor. Tess. Echo. Outside, a wooden sign. Wexler Foundation, 1 dog at a time. Support poured in. Free food from a dog company. A vet volunteer. Students sent agility gear with paw prints. Jonas didn't understand the goodwill, but Valor did. He knew who belonged. He welcomed the broken. When a girl with tremors touched him, he laid down completely. At night, Jonas walked the field with Lena, Valor shadowing. He showed her the old drills, the Hawk Hill, Bishop's resting place. "Do you think all this pain had to happen? For something better to be born?" she asked. "I think we don't get to choose what breaks us," Jonas said. "But we choose what we do with the pieces." 3 days later, they rescued their first dog. A malnourished shepherd, skittish, sunken eyes. Jonas let Valor meet her first. He didn't bark, he just stood. When she later named Hope leaned into him, Jonas knew this wasn't a plan anymore. It was breathing. In the barn, under Aiden's photo, Jonas hung a sign. "We heal by leading gently. We train by listening. We earn trust 1 paw print at a time." No spotlights, no viral clips, just stories whispered from dog to dog, handler to heart. One day, a social worker approached Lena. "I have a boy, 7, PTSD after a fire, doesn't talk." But he saw Valor's picture and smiled. Bring him, Lena said. His name was Theo. Big eyes, too large hoodie. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't enter the barn. But Valor didn't ask permission. He flopped in the yard and waited. 30 minutes passed. Then Theo reached out, touched one ear, didn't speak, but didn't flinch. That night, Lena and Jonas sat at the barn table, napkins filled with scribbles. A children's unit, Lena said. Not therapy, just space for dogs to be what they are. Listeners, Jonas agreed. By spring, one stall became the quiet corner. Bean bags, no charts, just open hours. Kids came, scarred, silent, sleepless. And the dogs listened. One girl, Maris, hadn't spoken in 9 months since her mother died. But she sat beside Valor and drew him with wings, then drew a girl sleeping with her hand on his chest. Jonas asked, "Is that you?" She nodded, then tucked the drawing into Valor's collar. Some days Lena read stories. Not about trauma, about dogs coming home. Jonas brought in younger K9s. The kids brushed them, walked them, sat beside their heartbeats. No milestones, just moments, whispers, a giggle, a command. One morning Theo returned with a letter. He handed it to Jonas and ran toward Valor under the oak tree. Crayon letters read, "Dear Valor, thank you for not being scared of my silence. You made me brave again. Love, Theo." Jonas placed it in a drawer under Aiden's photo. Later, he and Lena sat on the porch. "You think we're doing this right?" he asked. "I think we stopped trying to fix," she said, "and started simply being." Healing wasn't loud. It was paws on wood, a head resting on fur. Silence shared. Then came the wall. The outer brick gate had long been bare. One foggy morning, Lena stood before it with brushes and Aiden's old sketch echo, ears up, eyes forward. Jonas joined her. "You sure?" She nodded. "It's time." Veteran artist Luis volunteered. He'd once served with a K9 named Rocco. When he saw the sketch, his voice caught. "I saw that footage when I needed hope." Children came to help. Theo painted Aiden's jacket. Maris shaded Echo's eyes. Jonas added small strokes for ridges, badge stitching each like a prayer. By week 3 it was nearly done. Echo stood proud, eyes fixed on Dawn. Beside him, Aiden, not in uniform, not armed, just his hand on Echo's back. The space between them was loyalty made visible. Above, Echo lives here. Below, they were not forgotten. At the unveiling, the air smelled of pine and earth. Veterans stood silent. Children sat cross-legged. Even Darla, the mistrusting golden retriever, curled near the front. Jonas stepped forward, cloth in hand. This isn't just about one man or one dog. It's about everyone they saved. Everything they gave that went unseen. He looked at Lena. This wall isn't paint. It's proof. Some names don't live in stone. They live in service. He pulled the cloth free. Silence. Then a voice. "That's the one who waited." A girl who'd only spoken once before pointed to Echo. "He waited for Aiden, didn't he?" Lena knelt. "Yes. And now they wait together, right here." That evening, Jonas walked the grounds. When he returned, Valor was beneath the mural, staring up. Jonas sat beside him. "I think they'd be proud," he whispered. Valor didn't move. Sometimes grief wasn't tears. It was breath shared under the watch of ghosts who never really left. That night, Lena lit a candle near the wall. The flame flickered, and for a heartbeat, Echo's eyes caught the light, and maybe, just maybe, he was still watching. It began quietly. No headlines, no press releases, no grand pronouncements, just a soft whimper behind the birthing stall walls, and the steady rhythm of life returning in the most primal, most sacred way possible. Jonas had barely slept. He sat cross-legged on the straw-covered floor, back against the wooden beam, boots kicked off, flannel sleeves rolled to the elbows. The smell of cedar and iodine hung faint in the air. Moonlight poured through the high window, casting long shadows across the barn, as if the past still lingered just outside reach. Valor lay nearby, alert but calm, his coat rising and falling gently. He watched everything, not pacing, not growling, just watching, as if he knew this night mattered more than the missions, more than the medals, because tonight his legacy began again. The mother was a soft-eyed sable female named Nira, rescued from the Darien facility 2 years ago. She had once flinched at the sound of boots. Now she leaned into Jonas's touch, trusting, calm, even through labor. Her sides trembled with effort, but her gaze never wavered from Valor, as if she drew strength from him. The first pup came just after midnight, then another, then 3 more. Jonas didn't count aloud. He didn't need to. He moved with practiced care, catching, clearing, swaddling each life into warmth. By the time dawn painted soft orange across the barn rafters, there were 7. 7 new hearts beating into the silence. He sat there, eyes glassy, a tiny bundle cradled in his calloused hands, its eyes still sealed, its breath a whisper. But even now, the shape of the ears, the strength in those tiny paws, unmistakable. Jonas let out a slow breath. "Hey there, little one," he murmured. "You've got no idea whose blood you carry." Valor moved closer, pressing his muzzle gently against Jonas's shoulder, then to the pup, so soft, so careful. Jonas looked at him, voice thick with emotion. "You did good, boy. Not just tonight. Always." It wasn't about pedigree. Not for Jonas. Not for the others who had gathered at the edges of the barn, now trainers, volunteers, veterans, even a few wide-eyed kids holding cups of warm cocoa in trembling hands. This wasn't a breeding program. It was a promise. A continuation not of bloodlines, but of mission, of memory, of meaning. Later that morning, Lena entered with a thermos and 2 mugs. She didn't speak at first, just knelt beside Jonas, watching the litter nurse in sleepy harmony. Then she whispered, "They're already asking. Reporters, buyers. Someone offered 5 figures for first pick." Jonas shook his head without looking up. "Not for sale. They won't understand. I don't need them to." He turned to her finally, voice steady now. "These pups won't guard mansions. They won't fetch trophies. They'll find the broken. They'll protect the forgotten. They'll walk into the fire when no one else will." He paused. "Just like Echo. Just like Valor." Lena nodded, blinking back tears. And for a long while they just sat there. 2 people, 1 dog, and a handful of hope wrapped in fur and breath. By noon, Jonas had pinned a small sign outside the barn, handwritten, simple, the new line. Underneath, in Lena's neater script, "Born not for profit, but for purpose." And beneath that, acceptance, protection, healing. Some passerby asked what it meant. Jonas smiled. It means the line didn't die with Echo, or Aiden, or the ones we lost. It means they live on, in purpose, in pause yet to touch ground. That evening, as the sun sank and stars emerged one by one above the ridgeline, Jonas walked to the gate alone. He stopped beneath the mural. Echo, Aiden, side by side in twilight. He stood in silence, letting the hush of the land settle around him. Then, almost inaudibly, he spoke. "They're here. You'd be proud." Behind him, Valor let out a low, contented chuff. 7 lives, 1 legacy. The line had returned, not louder, but stronger. And this time, it would not be erased. The chairs were mismatched, some plastic, some folding, a few borrowed from the community center down the road. The bunting hung slightly crooked across the wooden archway, where someone had hand-painted in green and gold, Wexler K9, first-class graduation. The air smelled faintly of sawdust, spring lilacs, and something else, something deeper. Hope, perhaps. Earned, not borrowed. Scarred, but real. Jonas stood at the edge of the makeshift stage, clipboard in hand, but he hadn't looked at it once. He didn't need to. He knew every dog by name, every handler by heart. This was no academy. This was family. 6 dogs stood in a row beside their humans' tails, wagging, some with ears perked, some with scars still healing. Every single one had a story. One had been rescued from a fighting ring. Another was once feral, captured with a snare. One had come limping and malnourished through a storm, then curled up outside the barn and refused to leave. Now they wore custom vests embroidered by local volunteers. Not armor, but promise. Each vest read simply, "Wexler K9, here to listen." In front of them, a crowd of about 40 sat on hay bales and folding chairs. Veterans, social workers, survivors, foster families, even the mayor, who had turned down a city gala to be here. And at the very front, beside Lena, sat a boy named Micah, 8 years old. PTSD from a house fire no one ever explained. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in over 6 months. He hadn't smiled in 3. But today, he was here. And his eyes, dark and wide and haunted, never left Valor. The ceremony began with a simple bell. Lena stepped up to the mic, smiling. "This isn't a normal graduation," she said. "These dogs didn't learn to sit for treats or shake paws for show. They learned how to stay when the world falls apart. They learned how to feel when humans forget how." She turned toward Jonas. "And they were trained by someone who knew what it meant to lose and still love anyway." A soft wave of applause. Jonas stepped forward, cleared his throat. He didn't prepare a speech. He never did. "I don't know if dogs believe in second chances," he began, voice low and even, "but I know they give them." A pause. He looked out at the handlers, nervous, proud. "And I know this much. The dogs standing before you today aren't tools. They're not symbols. They're partners. Guardians of the quiet." He looked at Micah for a heartbeat longer. "And sometimes they're the only ones who can hear the screams we never say out loud." The crowd fell silent. Then came the roll call. One by one the pairs stepped forward. A cheer, a name called, a collar buckled, a paw lifted in what could have been a salute. And then, finally, came Valor. He wasn't on the list, but he didn't need to be. Jonas gave a short nod, and Valor padded forward not to center stage, but down into the front row, directly toward Micah. The boy's breath caught. He clutched the hem of his hoodie, fingers trembling, eyes shining. Valor stopped just before him, sat gently, waited. Micah looked at Lena, at Jonas, at the crowd, and then he let go. He knelt, shaking, and wrapped his arms around Valor's neck. No commands, no coaxing, just a child and a dog, locked in silence, until Micah whispered, "Thank you," a single word. But it broke something in the room. Soft sobs rippled through the crowd. Jonas closed his eyes. Lena pressed her palm over her mouth. And Valor! Valor simply leaned in closer, resting his head gently against Micah's shoulder. Not moving, not breathing too hard, just holding, as if that boy had always been his to protect. Later, after the ceremony had ended and the sun cast long golden stripes across the grass, Jonas sat alone on the barn porch, a certificate in his lap, a photograph in his hand. Aiden and Echo, blurry, smiling, mid-training. Valor lay beside him, head on his boots, eyes closed. "They would have liked today," Jonas murmured. Valor gave a soft exhale. Somewhere out in the fields, one of the new pups barked a high, clumsy note, still learning its place in the world. Jonas didn't turn. He just smiled. The line continued, and tonight it walked taller. The sun was folding itself into the hills when Jonas stepped out of the barn. That kind of quiet dusk where the wind stops chasing itself and the birds go silent like they're holding space for something sacred. He didn't carry a leash. Never needed one with Valor. The old shepherd rose slowly from the porch, joints a bit stiff, but his eyes still bright. He fell into step beside Jonas like he always had, head low, ears forward, as if the path belonged to them and had been waiting all along. No mission tonight, no courtroom, no headlines, just a man and his dog, and a trail that smelled like soil, pine, and the last memory of war. They passed the split fence line where the wildflowers had taken over, the thistle and blue flax dancing in the breeze like they had their own small rebellion. The field stretched wide untamed, golden, and behind them the silhouette of the rebuilt Wexler facility glowed with soft amber light. Lena had insisted they install solar lamps, but Jonas had kept one section dark where Echo's mural watched the road. Some shadows, he'd learned, weren't meant to be erased. They were meant to be carried. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something old-folded, creased, weather-worn. A picture. Aiden, younger than he remembered, laughing with his arms slung around Echo, the shepherd's eyes just slightly off-camera watching something, as always, that no one else could see. Jonas stared at it for a long while, thumb tracing the outline of their silhouettes. Then he knelt in the grass and buried the photo near the roots of a young oak. No words, just a breath, and a hand pressed to the earth. "Still with us," he whispered. They kept walking, past the training field, past the creek that had finally unfrozen after years of being dammed up by debris and silence. Valor paused once to sniff at a tree trunk where another dog had marked its journey. He lifted his head, alert. A deer flicked its ears in the distance but didn't run. The world, it seemed, had made peace with them. As they crested the final hill, the one that overlooked both the past and the place they'd built since, Jonas stopped. The sky had turned soft lavender. No gunshots, no sirens, no breathing tube echoing in a hospital room, no cages, just wind. And a shepherd who'd walked through hell and come out the other side with nothing left to prove, only someone to walk beside. Jonas crouched, resting a hand between Valor's shoulder blades. "You stayed," he said quietly, "even when I didn't deserve it." Valor didn't move, just breathed, still, present, whole. Jonas stood again, voice low and almost broken with gratitude. We came home. Valor looked up at him and wagged his tail. No music played, no cameras rolled, but somewhere in that dusk something sacred was laid to rest. Not forgotten, just finally allowed to breathe. They walked the rest of the way back in silence, but it was the kind that heals, not the kind that hurts. In the quiet footprints of Valor and the steady hands of Jonas, we are reminded of something timeless, our capacity to heal, to hope, and to protect those who cannot speak for themselves. This story is not just about one dog or one man. It is about the bond that defies pain, the loyalty that survives betrayal, and the courage to rebuild what was once broken. German shepherds like Valor and Echo are more than working dogs. They are guardians of trust, vessels of empathy, and living testaments to resilience. Through their eyes, we see a world where love is wordless but powerful, where a wag of the tail can mean survival, and where one act of kindness can ripple across a lifetime. May this journey remind us that every life matters, especially those often overlooked, that second chances aren't just for people, and that somewhere in the rustling grass and soft twilight, there's always a path back home, if we dare to walk it. Support your local shelters, believe in redemption, and never underestimate what one dog and one person who refuses to give up can change. For in their shared silence, the loudest truths are found.